Welcome back to our series, where we are revisiting the invention of photography and the stories of the people who helped make things happen. As this is part 11 of the series, if you missed the first episodes, you may want to pause this video and start from part 1. In this episode, more novel processes are invented. 1860 ushered in a decade where there were quite a few significant scientific and historical events that happened, including the Confederation of Canada, the American Civil War, abolishment of slavery in the States, and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Science and engineering were starting to get a handle on the causes of diseases, and Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel managed to successfully stabilize nitroglycerin with diatomaceous earth without meeting the same fate as his brother, and patented dynamite as a result. Improvements in plate chemistry, printing, and imaging were made in the first half of the 1860s. Major Charles Russell, like Captain Levitt Ibison mentioned previously, was a soldier in the English Army. While dry plates were a major advancement for photographers, the early iterations were not as sensitive to light as the wet plate collodion process. Initially, pyrogalol, or 1,2,3-trihydroxybenzene, was used in combination with acetic acid to reduce the unreacted silver nitrate and develop the image. Pyrogallic acid can be absorbed by the skin and is toxic. He improved the sensitivity by using a bromine iodine collodion and used as a developer pyroammonia, which is a pyrogalol in ammonia, a strong alkali chemical used instead of acetic acid. This is the first time that a non-acid was used to help develop an image. After the plate was dried, it was coated with tannic solution to help preserve and prolong the plate. His innovation made the dry plate as sensitive as the wet plate. In 1858, Charles Harrison, an American photographer and lensmaker, and Joseph Schnitzer received a patent for an adjustable lens diaphragm aperture. This invention was not widely adopted for use in photography until the 1880s for a variety of reasons. It was a delicate and costly process to manufacture. The Waterhouse stops were adequate for most photographers' needs, and lens manufacturers concentrated more on improving sharpness and reducing aberrations. The technical and economic conditions to make lenses with adjustable irises became more desirable in the 1880s. In 1862, just 2 years before Harrison's death, this pair of inventors received a patent for an 80 or 90 degree wide angle lens, depending on the source referenced, which could focus on a plate rather than a curved plate and whose resulting images were distortion-free and beautifully rendered. The appeal of these lenses was immediate, and the other lens manufacturers were left scrambling in order to catch up with this new development. So good was this lens that it is still highly sought after to this day by antique camera collectors. Here's a diagram of apertures that control the amount of light that passes through a camera lens. The larger the opening, the shallower the depth of field, or the part of the image that is in sharp focus, and the faster the shutter speed can be. As the lenses stop down, less light passes through the lens, necessitating a slower shutter speed. At the same time, the amount of the image that is in focus increases. The diagram on the right is an image of the globe lens design from 1862. At the age of 16, Englishman Benjamin Sass became an amateur photographer and enthusiast, a passion that remained with him for the rest of his life. At age 22, he and his assistant, William Bolton, began experiments with wet plate collodion. Up until this point, the sensitization of collodion was a two-part process, with the collodion being immersed in a silver nitrate bath. What if you could just mix everything together and then pour it onto the plate? That's what Bolton did, with chemistry input from Sass. They found a way to emulsify bromized collodion containing silver nitrate crystals with water and use it either as a wet or dry plate when coated with tannin. The end result was deemed to be somewhat inferior to the prevalent wet plate collodion of the time. In 1867, the pair founded the Liverpool Dry Plate and Photographic Printing Company to manufacture their invention. They continued to refine their process, and in 1874, the end product was improved further. An English physicist, chemist, and inventor, Sir Joseph Wilson Swan, started working on making an incandescent bulb in 1850, and for the next 30 years, he overcame the problem of having a good enough vacuum pump in time to patent his invention at the same time that Thomas Edison did. In between this period of time, Swan made a few advancements that benefited photography. In 1864, Swan received a patent for the carbon transfer process of making a permanent print. Gelatin mixed with carbon black pigment was applied over a thin piece of paper and allowed to dry. The sheet is then soaked with a potassium dichromate solution and dried again. A negative is placed in close contact with the sheet and exposed to ultraviolet light, which hardens the part of the gelatin when UV light passes through in proportion to the amount of light received. The unhardened gelatin is dissolved in warm water, and the pigmented image is transferred to a substrate to make the print. While carbon black was the first pigment used, other pigments would eventually be utilized also. Later in 1871, Swan was credited with using sheets of nitrocellulose instead of glass as a substrate for photographic plates. Celluloid, as it would come to be known, played an important role in future photographic advancements. Scotsman John Taylor started studying optics and chemistry in 1845, and would also apprentice as a watchmaker, jeweler, and optician. He also was a writer, journalist, and editor for the Photographic Times starting in 1864. While at school, he became fascinated, even somewhat obsessed, with daguerreotype photography. His informal gatherings with like-minded friends grew in 1861 into the Edinburgh Photographic Society, an organization that still exists to this day. He began working with ways to use artificially created light to make images with. In 1865, he made a fast-igniting powder from magnesium, potassium chlorate, sulfur, and antimony sulfide. The complaint at the time was that it was rather expensive, created a lot of smoke, and smelled bad. Given the ingredients and that it contained sulfur, I imagine that the complaints were justified. Not much happened for the next 15 years, but when magnesium became cheaper in the 1880s, others began to experiment with making flash powders. In 1887, Meath and Gadika used magnesium powder in combination with potassium chlorite only to make blitzlicht or flashlight. This may be the kind of image that you recognize when Hollywood tries to recreate a scene involving a large format camera that uses ignited chemicals to create a burst of light. Please join us next time when we finally get a roadmap, an idea is patented, we begin to see things in 3D, and a possible Star Trek connection and more. We look forward to you being with us.